A confession to a pastor is supposed to be sacred, a secret kept between two people and God himself. But for Pastor Gabriel Montgomery, my private struggles were nothing more than ammunition he could use to destroy me. A man who cannot properly manage his own household is completely unfit to lead an entire region, Gabriel announced from the pulpit on a bright Sunday morning, his deep voice echoing through a sanctuary filled with 2,000 people. He didn't say my name directly, but he absolutely didn't have to. Every person in that building knew exactly who he was talking about. He began describing details that only he could possibly know, things I'd shared with him in complete confidence just 1 week earlier. He talked about my temporary financial struggle during my wife's serious illness, about the private arguments Naomi and I had been having while under intense stress, about the personal crisis I had shared with him through tears in his office. I sat frozen in the front row where the deacons always sat during service, watching the congregation's respect for me vanish in real time. People who'd greeted me warmly just 30 minutes earlier now wouldn't meet my eyes. My promotion to regional head pastor wasn't just slipping away from my grasp, it was being completely destroyed right in front of me. Gabriel looked down at me with what he probably thought was godly pity, believing he'd successfully buried my career to protect his own position of power. What Gabriel didn't realize in his rush to expose me was that he'd made one critical technical mistake. In forwarding our private email thread to the church elders to prove I was unfit for leadership, he had forgotten something important. I wasn't the only person who had used that email conversation to send attachments over the past year. Gabriel had sent me plenty of files through those same emails, documents he'd always told me were confidential outreach plans that I should review. I'd never been able to open most of them before because they were password protected, but now, in his carelessness, he'd attached the entire unencrypted folder to prove his point about my instability. The elders were about to see much more than my struggles. Before I continue, kindly use this opportunity to like this video and subscribe to this channel to get more stories from us. Your likes and subscription is what keeps us going. Back to the story. My name is Isaac Chambers, and I had been serving as a branch deacon at New Covenant Church for 8 years. The members of my branch loved me because I was honest and transparent with them about everything, never pretending to be perfect or above the everyday struggles that regular people faced. I visited sick members in hospitals, counseled young couples having marriage problems, organized food drives for struggling families, and genuinely cared about the people I served. But the position of regional head pastor was opening up for the first time in 12 years, and I was the clear top candidate based on my years of faithful service and the recommendations from my branch members. Everyone assumed I would get the promotion except for one person, Pastor Gabriel himself. Gabriel had been the regional head pastor for those 12 years, and he ran the church like it was his personal kingdom rather than God's house. He made decisions without consulting the church elders, spent money without proper approval, and treated anyone who questioned him like they were challenging God himself. I'd noticed things over the years that didn't sit right with me: expensive trips that seemed unnecessary, vague explanations about budget shortfalls, a general lack of financial transparency that made me uncomfortable. If I became regional head pastor, I would have full access to all the internal financial audits and records. Gabriel knew this, and it terrified him. He needed to stop my promotion by any means necessary, even if that meant betraying pastoral confidentiality. 3 months before that terrible Sunday, my wife Naomi was diagnosed with a serious heart condition that required immediate surgery and months of recovery. The medical bills were crushing despite our insurance. We had some savings, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover everything. I was working extra hours doing handyman jobs on the side. Naomi couldn't work at all during recovery, and the stress was enormous. We argued about money for the first time in our 15-year marriage. We were both exhausted and scared, and taking it out on each other in ways we normally never did. I felt like I was failing as a husband and provider, drowning under pressure I couldn't control no matter how hard I worked. I went to Gabriel seeking spiritual guidance and prayer support, believing that my pastor would help carry this burden with me in confidence. I sat in his office with tears running down my face, telling him everything: the medical debt, the arguments with Naomi, the shame I felt about struggling financially, the fear that I wasn't strong enough to handle what God had placed on my plate. Gabriel listened with what seemed like compassion, nodding and taking notes, praying with me at the end. "Your struggles are safe with me, brother," he said, gripping my shoulder. "This is between you, me, and the Lord. We'll get through this together." I left his office feeling lighter, grateful to have a pastor I could trust with my darkest moments. But Gabriel saw my confession as an opportunity rather than a sacred trust. He immediately told the church elders that I was emotionally unstable and financially compromised, making me completely unfit for regional leadership. To prove his claims and make sure they believed him, he forwarded an entire year's worth of our private email correspondence to the 50 most influential elders of the church, who had the most say in deciding who the next regional head would be. The emails included everything I'd written to him: my fears about Naomi's health, my stress about our finances, my questions about whether I was strong enough to handle more responsibility, my moments of doubt and weakness. Gabriel wanted to publicly shame me into withdrawing my name from consideration for the promotion. He wanted me humiliated and broken, unable to challenge his authority. That Sunday morning sermon was his victory lap, his way of making sure the entire congregation knew I was unworthy of leadership without technically breaking confidentiality by using my name. Everyone knew anyway. As I sat there listening to my private pain being broadcast to 2,000 people, I felt anger burning in my chest alongside the humiliation. This man was supposed to be a shepherd protecting his flock, not a wolf destroying anyone who threatened his territory. But I forced myself to stay calm and stay seated. I had a strange feeling that Gabriel's arrogance was about to be his downfall. I just didn't know exactly how yet. I could see some board members in the congregation looking at their phones with confused expressions, scrolling through something with growing concern. What Gabriel didn't understand about technology, because he was in his 60s and barely knew how to use email properly, was that when you forward an email thread, you forward everything in that thread from both people. He thought he was only sharing my confessional messages to him, but Gabriel had been using that same exact email conversation for months to send me what he called instructional documents. These were files he told me were confidential outreach plans that I should review and give feedback on. They were always password protected, and he'd tell me the passwords verbally during our meetings, except I'd been so busy with Naomi's medical situation that I'd honestly never opened most of them. They just sat in my email inbox, unopened attachments in our ongoing thread. When Gabriel forwarded that email thread to the church elders to expose my weakness, he made a fatal technical error. He was trying to forward my messages, but in doing so, he accidentally attached the master folder containing all his documents in their unencrypted, unprotected original form. While the church elders started reading through my private struggles like Gabriel wanted them to, several of them scrolled down through the longer email chain out of thoroughness. That's when they found Gabriel's attachments that had been sent over the past year. Curious about what their regional head pastor had been sharing with me, they started opening the files. What they found inside those documents had absolutely nothing to do with outreach plans. The files were spreadsheets showing two completely separate sets of financial books. One set was the official church budget that was presented to the elders and congregation every quarter, showing reasonable expenses and proper allocation of tithe money. The other set was a detailed record of a private offshore bank account where roughly 20% of all tithe money had been quietly disappearing for the past 3 years. Gabriel had been systematically stealing from the church, taking money that hardworking members sacrificed from their own limited incomes to give to God's work. He'd been moving it to an account in the Cayman Islands, hiding it from audits, and using it for purposes that had nothing to do with ministry. The spreadsheets documented every transfer with cold precision. But the financial theft wasn't even the worst of what the elders discovered in those files. Buried between what Gabriel had labeled as sermon notes and outreach strategies, there were personal photos and travel receipts that told a shocking story. Gabriel had been using the stolen church funds to fly a second family to the Bahamas twice a year for expensive vacations. Photos showed him on beaches with a woman who wasn't his wife and 2 children, who weren't the ones he claimed as his own in our church directory. The timestamps on the photos matched up perfectly with the times Gabriel had told our congregation he was away on mission trips or ministry conferences. Every word had been a calculated lie. The man currently standing behind the pulpit preaching about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of faithfulness had a complete digital trail of infidelity dating back 7 years, all the way to shortly after he'd been ordained as regional head pastor. He had another wife, other children, another entire life that he'd built and maintained with money stolen from people who trusted him to lead them spiritually. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its scale. The elders members who'd opened those files during the Sunday service were passing their phones to each other, their faces going pale with shock and rage. The chairman of the elders forum, a retired lawyer named Howard Blackwell, stood up in the middle of Gabriel's sermon, his hands shaking as he held his phone. "Pastor Montgomery," Howard said, his voice cutting through the sanctuary like a knife. The entire congregation went silent, shocked that someone would interrupt a sermon. Gabriel stopped mid-sentence, looking annoyed at the disruption. "Yes, Howard," he said with forced patience. "Is something wrong?" Howard walked down the center aisle toward the pulpit, holding his phone up like evidence in a courtroom. "You forwarded emails to the board this week, asking us to examine Deacon Chambers' fitness for leadership based on his personal struggles," Howard said, his voice getting louder with each word. "You wanted us to look closely at these emails to see a man in crisis. Well, we've looked very closely at everything in that email thread." The confusion on Gabriel's face was almost funny to watch. He clearly had no idea what was coming, couldn't understand why Howard seemed so angry. Yes, and I trust the elders has seen that Deacon Chambers is clearly not ready for regional responsibility, Gabriel said smoothly. His financial mismanagement and emotional instability. Howard cut him off, his voice now shaking with barely controlled rage. We do see a man in crisis, Pastor. We see him very clearly. But he isn't sitting in the deacon's chair. He's standing behind the pulpit. The sanctuary erupted in confused murmurs. Gabriel's confident expression faltered. I don't understand what you're implying, he said, but I could hear the first hint of fear creeping into his voice. The emails you forwarded contain more than just Isaac's confessions, Howard continued, climbing the steps to the pulpit platform. They contained your attachments, financial records showing systematic embezzlement of church funds, photos and receipts documenting a second family you've been supporting in secret using stolen tithe money. Everything, Gabriel, we have everything. The color drained from Gabriel's face, so fast I thought he might actually faint. The congregation gasped collectively, the sound like wind rushing through the room. People started pulling out their own phones, frantically texting each other, demanding to know if this was real. I sat completely still in my front row seat, watching my accuser become the accused in the span of 30 seconds. The satisfaction I felt wasn't entirely holy, but it was deeply human. Gabriel tried to recover, switching to the defensive tactics he'd always used when questioned. This is absurd. I've been hacked. This is clearly a setup, someone trying to destroy my ministry because they're jealous of what God is doing through me. His voice rose to that commanding level he used during passionate sermons, trying to take control of the situation through sheer force of personality. But Howard wasn't backing down. The digital timestamps don't lie, Gabriel. These files were created and sent from your personal email account over the course of 3 years. The metadata proves it. The bank records prove it. The photos have location data proving exactly where and when they were taken. You can't hack reality. Other church elders were now standing up, making their way toward the front, forming a united wall of authority. The sanctuary was in complete chaos now, people standing and shouting questions, others crying, some just sitting in stunned silence trying to process what was happening. Gabriel made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Even if there are questionable files, they could have been put there by Isaac himself. He had access to this email thread. He's framing me to take my position. It was a weak accusation and everyone knew it, but Gabriel was drowning and grabbing at anything to stay afloat. Howard just shook his head sadly. The files were created years before Isaac was ever under consideration for regional leadership. They contained details and access codes that only you would have. Stop lying, Gabriel, it's over. Those 2 words seemed to break something in Gabriel. His shoulders sagged and he looked suddenly much older than his 63 years. The elders held an emergency meeting right there in the sanctuary, asking the small choir practice congregation to please exit quietly and go home. Gabriel was escorted to a side office and told to wait there with 2 church elders standing guard. I was asked to stay as well since my name had been dragged into this mess. For 3 hours, the elders reviewed every file, made phone calls to the church's bank and lawyers, and documented everything they were finding. The offshore account was real. The second family was real. The embezzlement had been happening for years, totaling over $500,000 of stolen money. Gabriel had been living a double life so complete that nobody had suspected a thing until his own arrogance and carelessness exposed him. By evening, the police had been called. Financial crimes detectives arrived and began their own investigation, taking copies of all the digital evidence the elders had found. Gabriel was read his rights and led out of the church in handcuffs, while a few remaining congregation members watched in horror and disbelief, and spread the news to the rest of the congregations who were not part of the choir practice that day. The man who'd stood in the pulpit that morning condemning me for financial struggles was now being arrested for stealing from the very people he was supposed to serve. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Gabriel didn't speak as he was led away, his head down, his expensive suit somehow looking cheap now that everyone knew it had been bought with stolen money. His legitimate wife and children would find out about his betrayal on the evening news. The financial crisis that Gabriel had tried to use to destroy my reputation actually ended up revealing something beautiful about our church community. When the full story came out over the following days, when people learned that I'd been struggling with medical debt while serving faithfully and honestly, the congregation rallied around Naomi and me in a way that brought me to tears. They organized a special Sunday collection specifically for our medical bills, with people giving sacrificially from their own limited resources. In a single Sunday, they raised enough money to completely clear our debt and even provide a cushion for Naomi's ongoing treatment. I stood before that congregation and wept openly, humbled by their generosity and grace toward a leader who'd been honest about his weakness. 3 months later, after the legal process had begun and Gabriel had been formally removed from all church positions, The church elders approached me about the regional head pastor position. I almost declined, feeling unworthy after everything that had happened, but they insisted. "Isaac, you showed us what real leadership looks like," Howard told me. "You were honest about your struggles instead of hiding them. You trusted the process instead of fighting back. You demonstrated humility and integrity, even when you were being publicly attacked. That's exactly what this region needs." I accepted with the condition that we implement new systems to prevent anyone else from ever abusing power the way Gabriel had. My first official act as regional head pastor was to bring in a third-party accounting firm to conduct regular audits that no one, including myself, could bypass. Gabriel Montgomery was eventually convicted of embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. He received a 6-year prison sentence, lost his ordination, and was required to pay back every dollar he'd stolen plus penalties. His legitimate family divorced him and moved to another state to escape the scandal. His second family, who'd apparently believed he was a wealthy businessman rather than a pastor, disappeared the moment the money stopped flowing. His name became a warning story told in seminaries and pastor conferences across our entire denomination, an example of what happens when pride and greed corrupt spiritual leadership. I don't take pleasure in his downfall, but I do see God's justice in how everything unfolded. Gabriel tried to use my vulnerability to hide his own sin, but light always finds a way to expose what's hidden in darkness. 5 years have passed since that unforgettable Sunday morning. Our region has grown stronger and healthier under transparent leadership and accountable financial practices. Naomi made a full recovery from her heart condition and now volunteers running a support group for families dealing with medical crises, using our story to encourage others. I still serve as regional head pastor, but I never forget where I came from or how close I came to losing everything because of one man's corruption. When new members ask me about leadership, I tell them the truth. Real strength isn't hiding your struggles or pretending to be perfect. Real strength is being honest about your weakness and trusting God to work through it anyway. Gabriel thought he could use confession as a weapon against me. He forgot that light doesn't just show the path forward. It exposes everything hiding in the corners, and eventually the truth always comes out. Thank you for listening. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment of what you think about this story. Check out other stories on this channel at Karma HQ.